In connection with the sugya of cheresh, the beginning of Maseches Chagiga, which talks about cheresh that eino badar ve'eino shemeya, being putter from mitzvahs. We'd like to now discuss, Be'ez Hashem, how this halacha is affected by the contemporary usage of hearing aids and cochlear implants, which give new ability to be able to hear, and thereby also to speak, and to listen to mitzvahs, which otherwise they couldn't. How this affects halacha in numerous applications. But before we speak about the halachas, let's first just describe and understand the metzios, the facts of these technologies, what a hearing aid is, what a cochlear implant is, the similarities and the differences between them. A hearing aid is actually a miniature microphone system. Just like a PA system in an auditorium takes the voice of the speaker and projects it amplified over a much larger area that people could hear what he says, of which otherwise they would not be able to hear. The hearing aid picks up with a microphone sounds and speech around it, and amplifies it and puts it into the ear of the wearer. It's making it be able to easier for him to be able to hear at a louder volume that which otherwise he would not be able to hear. It's a miniaturized microphone system. What happens is that he wears a little unit, usually behind the ear, sometimes in the ear, that has a microphone that picks up the sound. And then it's amplified by the aids technology, reproduces a sound that's exactly the same but louder and delivered right into the ear canal, right next to the eardrum. And that way, it's a much stronger, louder signal sound that he's able to hear, which otherwise he wouldn't be able to hear. Nowadays, they have digitized digital hearing aids that have multiple functions. They're able to filter out background sounds and just focus on the speech. They could be directional. They could have different functions of being attached to a telephone or to Bluetooth or to streaming. But the functionality is always really the same, which is amplifying and producing a sound stronger and louder than the original sound. A cochlear implant, by contrast, does not amplify, does not reproduce a sound, does not make any sound whatsoever, and does not put anything into the outer ear or to the eardrum at all. In that way, it's completely different than the hearing aid. Instead, what a cochlear implant does is that it bypasses the problem area, which is in the inner ear, the cochlea, where the hearing receptors, the little hair cells, thousands of them that receive the sound and bring it to auditory nerve, are located and are damaged in a hearing impaired person with a neurosensory hearing loss. And it bypasses that and delivers the sound straight to the auditory nerve, which takes it to the hearing center of the brain. The way it does this is having a surgically implanted electrode unit under the skin behind the ear. The electrode goes right into the inner ear and right up to the auditory nerve. And then when it picks up the sound, it delivers it right to the auditory nerve, and the brain hears it. How does it pick up the sound when it's inside the head? There's an outer unit, an external unit, which has a microphone and transmits the sounds that it picks up, radio waves, into the internal unit, and the internal unit then sends it along to the auditory nerve and able to hear it. The way it does that, it has to take the mechanical sound, the acoustic vibrating sound of sound waves, and transform it into an electronic signal that stimulates the auditory nerve, which is the exact same thing that the natural ear does in a normal person's hearing. How does normal hearing work? It's the same way. The speaker, with their voice, creates a vibration sound, mechanical acoustic sound, which goes sound waves through the air, and then hits the ear and collected goes to the eardrum of the listener. And that vibrates the eardrum and the middle ear pieces until the inner ear, the cochlea, responds with all those sound sensors, and somehow, miraculously, within the flow of Sabare, is able to then change that mechanical sound into an electronic neurosignal, which then the auditory nerve takes up to the brain. The cochlear implant does the same job as the normal cochlea would do, and takes the vibration, makes it into a nervous signal, and delivers it to the nerve in the brain. So this way, both a hearing aid and a cochlear implant are electronic inventions that are helping hearing, but the hearing aid is reproducing an amplified, louder sound that's similar to the original sound, while the cochlear implant is simply taking the original sound and delivering it to the nerve and to the brain without producing another sound at all. Because it bypasses the problem area of the cochlea with the damaged hearing cells, the sound that comes to the nerve and the brain, the sound that the listener actually hears, the hearing aid, the cochlear implant wearer, is much clearer, much higher quality than that of a hearing aid. A hearing aid is only making it louder and louder, but the inner ear is still damaged and it's still having trouble processing all the frequencies, the sounds of what they're listening to. I'll give you a personal example. When my son that was hearing impaired and for years wore a hearing aid and eventually then got a cochlear implant, after being activated with the implant, he turned to me and told me, "Abba, I'm hearing things I never heard before. I never knew that birds tweet and chirp. I never knew that running water makes a rushing sound. I never knew that you could hear the wind rustling in trees. These are environmental background, soft sounds that you don't focus on like someone speaking to you, and a hearing aid didn't pick up, but the cochlear implant did." And likewise, the cochlear implant, the speech itself delivers. It delivers a speech sound so much clearer and easier to understand that makes such a difference for the wearer. And this makes a huge difference halachically now, and developmentally, for the Jewish hearing impaired. Before the advent of the cochlear implant, which began in the late 1980s, and only became popular after that. Now it's tens of thousands, if not many more, that are wearing cochlear implants. It's become the standard. But before that, until the 1980s, wearing hearing aids didn't always do it, and they weren't able to really learn to speak and become oral. And the common way of education was manual, was with sign language. And whether a signing person is considered to be a bardas is questionable. We talked about that yesterday. There's good reason to say yes. But they became now isolated in their own little world of the signing manual world. They weren't part of the regular school system, mainstream yeshivas, chadarim, Beis Yaakovs, and it affected their lives, and halachic status became somewhat of a question. But since the common diagnosis of a newborn being hearing impaired, within a few months or weeks they get cochlear implants, they speak like everyone else speaks. Maybe with some speech therapy necessary, but learn to speak normal. And they've all become now in this generation, as opposed to earlier, mainstream, regular yeshiva, regular cheder, regular Beis Yaakov, regular kollel, all the way up, because they're regular speaking and talking people. And therefore there's no question in the world that they are medaber ve'enu shemeya at very least, if not medaber and shemeya, and they're chayv on all mitzvahs. And chinuch-wise and Yiddishkeit-wise, Shmiras mitzvahs-wise, they're mekayim kol mitzvahs. That's a huge, huge difference that the cochlear implant has made. But let's talk about fulfilling mitzvahs. Fulfilling mitzvahs that are usually listened to by hearing. Most people listen to Kiddush by being said by the head of the family, or Havdalah, or likewise Kriyas Torah and Kriyas Megillah by the Baal Koreh in the shul, and certainly Tekiyah Shofar by the Baal Tokeya. Many mitzvahs that we do, Parshat Zachor, many mitzvahs that we do, not by every single person reading it himself or doing it himself, but we yotze with Shomea Ka'ona, with listening, is considered halachically like speaking. And it's yotze with connecting into the speech of the speaker by listening into it and understand, being part of it, part of the conversation. Shomea Ka'ona, that speech is attributed to you as though you said that Kiddush yourself or that Havdalah yourself. Shomea Ka'ona is predicated upon Shomea, upon hearing. If a person can't hear, then there's no Shemiya Kaina. He can't be Yotze by listening if he can't hear what's being said. What if he can only hear by an artificial means, by electronic invention of a hearing aid or a Cochlear implant? Is that considered to be hearing the voice of the speaker to be Yotze with, or is that not? This is a major halachic issue. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, one of the major poskim that took up this whole subject, both in the technology and studying how the electronics of it work, and the halacha, which he mastered as well, analyzed that the a hearing aid or a microphone does not deliver the original sound of the speaker, the voice of the speaker, but a duplication, a replication of that. Just like a telephone, when you're speaking a long-distance telephone or international telephone, you hear what the person is saying, right? You don't hear his voice shouting across the country, right? You hear the voice that went into the speaker of the phone that he was speaking to, and was sent electronically, wireless or by wire, either way, across the country in electronic form. And then in your unit, your speaker, your telephone unit, it reproduces that sound exactly like his sound, or practically almost indiscernibly the same. And you're hearing him what he says, but you're not actually hearing his direct voice. You're hearing a machine speaking to you. And a machine, Rosh Shlomo Zalman says, is not mechuyev in mitzvahs. It's not a bar chiyuva. We all know the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah that says, you can't be yotze a mitzvah by listening to someone that's not mechuyev in that mitzvah. The machine is not mechuyev in a mitzvah. It's like a tape recorder. It's like something would be speaking that's not a bar mitzvah. You can't be yotze by listening to a machine speaking. So how can we be yotze by listening to a telephone or a radio, or nowadays post-corona we could say a Zoom? How could it be? You could see the face, you could hear the speaker or the Balkari relating the Megillah on the Zoom, but it's a reproduction of the original voice. It's not the voice itself of the speaker, and therefore you can't be yotze with it. This opinion was followed and adopted by nearly all the poskim in Eretz Yisrael in his day. Dayan Weiss, Minchas Yitzchak, and Rabbi Omer, Ravad Yosef, and across the board almost all the poskim in Eretz Yisrael, with the exception of the great Chazon Ish himself. Shlomo Zalman himself writes that he spoke about this with the Chazon Ish, and the Chazon Ish disagreed. The Chazon Ish says, L'daiti, according to his opinion, his Das Torah, Keiman Shakol Hanishma, since the voice that you end up hearing, Notzrai they kol hamadaber, was created by the speaker's speech. The voice of the speaker is what makes the voice that you hear. Kol hazen nishma miyad kederech madaber, which you're hearing instantaneously live stream, not like a tape recorder being played over it afterwards. It's possible this is considered to be like actually hearing him speak, or a takeya, or the sound of the shofar that the shofar person is blowing, which you're hearing through the microphone or through the hearing aid. Shlomo Zalman himself says he doesn't understand it, doesn't agree, but the Chazon Ish is the Chazon Ish. It's a major paisek. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, the Rav of Yerushalayim and one of the Gedolei HaMorim, agree with that as well, that you're yotze, with everything else besides Tekiyah Shofar, which he had an issue about. But very significantly for us, from Moshe Feinstein, Zechron Bracha, the Igros Moshe and the Pesach Hador of America, Paskind in Igros Moshe or Chaim, two places, and second Chelik Sim Kuf Ches and the fourth Chelik Sim Tzadi Aleph, that you're yotze by listening, hearing through a hearing aid is considered to be hearing, unlike it was a telephone or a microphone or a radio or a Zoom. It's all the same idea, because it's reproducing it simultaneously and identically. And he explains it so beautifully. He explains for Moshe that sound and hearing, even by normal, healthy people, is a process. There's the vibrations made by the speaker. There's the sound waves that are in between. There's the sound that hits and vibrates the eardrum and the middle ear and the inner ear. There's a transformation from the mechanical vibration sound, acoustic sound, into electronic neural signals that the cochlear inner ear does, and then sends it up to auditory nerve. There's a lot of steps that are along the way. And that's called shmiya. That's what the Torah calls listening, hearing. So he says this is doing the same process. Even the hearing aid that does reproduce a second sound, right? But that's part of the same process. And as long as it's part of the same process and it's happening instantaneously, the same time, the same way, same sound, then it is considered to be hearing the same sound as well. And therefore, Ramesh Zechron Bracha paskin that you're yotze by wearing a hearing aid. So wearing a hearing aid and listening to Kiddush or Havdalah or Kriyas Megillah and such gets involved in a significant machlekes of contemporary paskin. Shlomo Zalman and those that paskin to follow him paskin you're not yotze. Ramesh as well as Chazonish paskin that are yotze. And therefore, what should a person do? If he's able to be Yotzah Kol HaDeis, to be able to fulfill the mitzvah according to everyone, of course that would be best. So some people, depending on the degree of their hearing loss, it makes it easier to be able to wear the hearing aid. But without hearing aid, I can also hear, especially if I sit up close, stand right next to the person that's speaking, and he's speaking very loud. Let's say a Kriyas Megillah, the Balkari and Shul lanes very loud for the whole tzibur to hear, and you stand right next to him. You might be able to hear it even without your hearing aids. And then you'll be able to say l'chol hadayas according to everyone. T'kiya shofar, in particular, I want to mention, a shofar sound is much louder, actually 3 times louder than regular speech. Regular speech is in the area of 35 decibels in volume, while the shofar blowing is in the area of 110 decibels in volume, 3 times louder. So it could be that person can't even hear people shouting at him. Could be able to hear the shofar sound, especially if sound stands right next to it. So if they're able to do that, that's the best way to do it, yotze according to everyone. But what happens if a person's not able to do that? It doesn't work for him, he's not able to hear. Especially Megillah, they read very fast, I can't follow it, I get totally lost, right? So then you do have major poskim to rely on, none less than Ramesha Feinstein in America, or Chazonish, and Rabbi Tzipasach in Eretzel, Rabbi Yosef Engel before that as well. Poskim that say that you can be yotze with hearing through a hearing aid. So although it's a machlekes of poskim, you could be yotze like that. And certainly by drabanas, you could say Yosef Drabanan Lakula. So, and if you have no other choice, do the shofar like that. At least you'll be yotze according to these poskim. That's a story with a hearing aid. If we could take it off, then it's possible to do it yourself. Kiddush is not so hard to say. Kriyas Megillah is not so easy to say. So it depends what a person's able to do. If they can't do it themselves, then then they could lane it. If they can't lane it themselves, then listen without it. If you can't listen without it, listen with it, and you'll be, I'd say, according to a major poskim. A cochlear implant, though, is another story. A cochlear implant has a major advantage in halacha over the hearing aid, and that is that, as we mentioned before, a cochlear implant does not amplify and does not reproduce, does not duplicate, does not make another sound, it doesn't make any sound at all. It takes the original sound of the speaker, the voice of the speaker, or the sound of the shofar, and it delivers it to the auditory nerve in an electronic neuro signal, just like the regular inner ear does by every normal hearing person. There's no other sound that's being heard. There's no second sound that's being duplicated like a telephone does, or like a microphone does, or like a hearing aid does. The cochlear implant doesn't make a second sound that's being made by a machine that's not a bar chiyuva. Shlomo Zalman's argument to say you can't be yotze with a machine speaking doesn't apply when it's not the machine speaking. The machine doesn't make any sounds whatsoever. There's no other sound besides the original speaker, the original sound of his voice or of the sound of the shofar. Now it's true that it's still artificial. It's still not a natural hearing. That is a halachic point. But the main objection that was raised against the hearing aids was or microphone, is the duplication of a new sound being made artificially by a machine, and that sound that you're listening to is not a valid sound to listen to be yotze mitzvah. By the cochlear implant, there is no second sound that's being created, and therefore that objection doesn't apply. So it's quite possible, maybe not absolutely necessary, but it's quite possible that even if you would hold that you're not going to be yotze listening through a microphone, telephone, or hearing aid, you could yes be yotze mitzvah by listening to it through a cochlear implant. Most people that wear cochlear implants don't have an option of not wearing it and listening without it, and therefore they should certainly listen with the cochlear implant on, and that way they'll be yotze, according to Ramesha and Chazonish, that say the yotze with the hearing aid. And it could be that over here there's a reason to say that everyone would agree that you'd be yotze because you're hearing the original sound of the person actually speaking or reading the Megillah or blowing that shofar. I want to conclude with a tefillah that we should be zeicha b'mheira b'yameinu to that which we say by a benching of a Shel Brachos, Oz Ilaim Bashir Yaron. Even the mute and the deaf will be able to get up and sing and dance and be able to have the power of speech. The mute will burst forth with song, which is the fulfillment of the Nevuah of Yeshaya Hanavi, Lamed Hey Vav. Oz Tikbekachna Eine Evarim. Mos Mashiach B'Meir B'Meinu. The eyes of the blind will become light. They'll be able to see. V'oznei Chershim Tibatachna. And the ears of the deaf will be able to hear, and they'll be able to listen. Oz Yidalik Ayil Piseach. And the lame will be able to get up and dance and jump. The Taron Lashon Ilaim, and the mute will be able to sing forth in song, which was Zeichet to that B'Meir B'Yameinu. I just want to conclude again that this pamphlet that has all these halachas and sources and much more about Shabbos and usage and such is available from the OU. It was published by them recently, republished, and they can be contacted at 212-613-8234, 212-613-8234, or email at rway@ou.org, OURWAY@ou.org. Thank you very much. I wish we be zeicha to be able to be shemeya, v'ayna, and mekayim mitzvahs, get to kulam be'ezras Hashem. Thank you.